Chapter 12. Año Nuevo. If I'd thought that distance would ease the constant ache, the nearly physical pull on my being that Bella exerted, I was wrong. Stepping off the plane in Buenos Aires, I'd caught the most minute trace of Victoria. Mixed in with the smell of humans, machines, and Jet A was the tiniest hint of vampire. It was so faint that I thought it was my imagination at first. But I inhaled and caught it again. A single, sweet, undead note, floating in the sea of unknowing life. For that moment, that second, I felt relief. Half a world away from where my heart lay, I thought I had a chance to be free. But in the next second, a ray of sun stabbed through a crack in the jetway, bouncing off my hand like it hit a disco ball. Bella smiled in my mind, the sun lighting the red highlights in her lustrous hair. Very nice looking. The sunshine had touched the same spot she did that day in the meadow, but it carried nowhere near the heat that her skin did. Bella was so innocent then, so trusting, and so was I. I'd never understood why humans longed so much for their childhoods until now. The young were so undisciplined and messy, but ignorance truly was bliss. No longer innocent nor ignorant, I too wished for simpler times. Someone has to be the adult. Yes, I had nearly 90 years on Bella. I should be the adult. Yet I wanted nothing more than to fall at her feet and beg for her to take me back. During the first days in Argentina, I clung to the hope that the change in climate, the dark skin of the residents, and the less familiar chant of Spanish would deter me from thinking about Bella. I hadn't spent much time in this part of the world. Surely the newness would provide some diversion. It didn't. The long, sunny summer days tormented me more than the lack of leads. Limited to dark corners during the day, I should have been reading newspapers or listening to radio reports. I should have rented or bought a car with tinted windows so I could scout out places Victoria could be hiding in the daylight. I should have found an internet connection so I could find the most likely places she would be hunting come nightfall. So many things I should have been doing, rather than hiding with my memories of her. Burned by the sun? Bella laughed. I spent my days in some dank hideaway or another, arguing with her. No, arguing with myself. I repeated the reasons why I'd left, why I had to stay away. She, or rather the selfish side of me, countered everyone with a smile, a laugh, and a wave beckoning me back. It's not that far of a walk, she teased. When the sky turned as black as my mood, I pulled myself out of my hole for a little while. I scouted old crime scenes, the less desirable neighborhoods, and the edges of the tourist areas, looking for some trace of the red-haired demon. What was it you were looking for? Victoria, I reminded Bella weakly. Just like in the U.S., I found nothing. Soon, Bella intruded on my nights, pushing the memories on me in waves, smothering me. Breathless, she rested her translucent hand on my shoulder. You're driving me crazy. That makes two of us, I thought, reaching for her. I could have sworn my hand warmed as it neared her face. I didn't know how many days had passed before I gave up. I decided that maybe if I let my memories have me, uninterrupted for a little while, I'd be able to find the focus to return to the hunt. That's what I told myself anyway, as I left the city, heading into the delta. I crossed through the swamp, running so fast that my feet didn't have time to sink into the spongy bog. A river came into view, and I picked a tree and settled in its branches, shaded by the thick foliage. The lies came easily. Buenos Aires is home to millions. It would take time to find Victoria. If she knows I'm following her, this little break will lull her into a false sense of security. I need time to think. Right. I couldn't bring myself to admit that Victoria had stymied me again, but I hadn't found any evidence she'd ever left the airport. This bright, muggy land was not the ideal place for a vampire. Had she found her way onto another flight? How had I missed that? Slumped against a tree, the steamy air condensed on my cool skin, the droplets resembling human sweat. Something about her strategy escaped me. I stared across the river at a tapir climbing into the water, and my concentration wavered. The sight of the cow-sized creature should have stoked the smoldering embers in my throat, but I felt nothing. My eyes had reverted back to black weeks ago, I was sure, and the unending thirst had strengthened. After so long, I expected my neck to have a black cast from the constant baking. The thirst always burned, but never consumed. But the thirst was nothing compared to the pain of heartbreak. For once, I initiated the conversation with my hallucination. "What's your favorite gemstone?" At the time, I'd wondered if she'd prefer a necklace, bracelet, or ring. "I suppose onyx. It's the color of your eyes today." Her cheeks had turned a lovely shade of crimson as she admitted her weakness for me. Her fragrance always intensified when she blushed, increasing the burn. I was surprised that the fire didn't rear up now, but my throat remained at a dull simmer. A stab of fear caught my breath. Was I losing her? "That must have been a nice change for you," she said, wrapped in gauze and tubes. "No, I like how you smell," I said to the leaves. Maybe it's a signal. I shouldn't indulge myself like this. I should go back to my self-imposed quest. "You'll come over when I'm home, right?" she asked, catching me off guard, just like she had months ago. I pinched my lips shut, preventing the wrong answer from leaking out. "Not yet," I thought in reply. Only a few months had passed since that fateful day. Not nearly the year I'd promised myself. Each week, each day, each second was harder to bear than the last, but I had to make it. Then I could ruin another of her birthdays when I returned. I was hardly a present. "No presents," she repeated. Of course, Bella hated presents, as she probably hated me. As a thank you, she would undoubtedly send me away. Where would I go then? "Please," she whispered. That would be all it would take. She didn't know the power she held in that one word. It would be enough that I would do whatever she asked. Unfortunately, Bella seemed to tap into its power to put herself in danger rather than to protect herself. "I demand that you take me home," she'd said that stormy night outside of Forks. I'd been ready to ignore her, but she'd whispered that dreaded word. "Please." I'd let her go and nearly lost her forever. "Okay, I've decided that I don't want you to ignore my birthday. Will you show up?" As if to punctuate her request, a jet flew by, heading northeast, toward her. My head swiveled around. The airport was only a few miles away. "No!" I shook my head. How many more months did I have to wait until I saw her? No. The question is, how much longer can I protect her? I corrected myself. "She deserves to live. She must live," I chanted, the words becoming fainter and fainter. My mindless muttering was interrupted by my phone. Without thought, I snapped it open. "What?" I snapped. A sigh greeted me. Esme's sigh. "Hello" is the customary greeting. Her admonition lacked its usual forcefulness. My mind blanked. "I'm sorry, Mom. Hello." Why was she calling? Was something wrong? "Is everything okay?" I sat up a little straighter, even though she was thousands of miles away. "Things are quiet here. I don't mean to bother you, but I thought you might like some company today, as it were." She spoke slowly, cautiously. "It's no bother." It'd been so long since I'd heard Esme's voice, and though it contained as much sorrow as my absent heart, it was comforting nonetheless. "I'm glad you called. Are you at home?" I could hear low murmurs in the background. "Yes. Your father is at work, but Jasper and Alice are home today. Where are you? Emmett mentioned that you were going to Argentina?" Her strained voice belied her interest in small talk, but I played along. "I'm outside of Buenos Aires. Are Emmett and Rosalie still traveling the world?" "Yes. They came home for Christmas but left to finish their European honeymoon. We missed you," she added quietly. My throat ached, not from thirst, but from the baseball-sized lump filling it. I'm sorry I didn't make it back. I couldn't continue. I had no excuses and couldn't make any promises. I understand. He doesn't know, Mom, Alice said in the background, before being shushed. What don't I know? Is Carlisle okay? As I spoke the words, I realized that Alice didn't sound upset, but chagrined. Carlisle's fine. There's nothing to worry about. She sighed again. I was just worried about you. Have you made any progress? I narrowed my eyes at her hesitation. Something was going on, but I couldn't suspect her of anything underhanded. Some, I said vaguely. I'm sure Alice has. Alice didn't let me finish, interrupting. I haven't been watching you, Edward, at least not on purpose. Esme said nothing, but I could imagine the glare she gave my sister. Interruptions were not something my mother abided. Sorry, Alice mumbled. Please don't blame your sister. I asked her to check on you today. It's been so long, Edward. Would you consider meeting us in Rio, just for a day, just to humor your mother? Guilt overwhelmed me. Esme only wanted to confirm my well-being, I was sure. She wouldn't like what she found. Mom, I don't think that's such a good idea. It's summer here, and I couldn't let her see me like this. I understand, she repeated. You do know that we'd come in a second if you needed us, don't you? Something else lurked behind her concern. Yes, of course I do, Mom. Is there something I should know? She didn't answer right away. No, nothing. I just wanted to remind you that we love you. Her voice hitched. That I love you. I love you too, Mom. Thanks. Again Alice hissed, but didn't say anything intelligible. I guess that's all then. Be safe, Edward. I will. Goodbye, Mom. I hung up, unable to shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. Why would she call, but not tell me what was bothering her? But there was a clue. Today. She'd said it twice. Why? I opened my phone again, checking the date. If I'd had a heart, it would have stopped. Today was January 18th, the day I'd first seen Bella, first been tempted to kill her, exactly 1 year ago. My eyes closed, and I saw her, staring across the cafeteria at me. Her hair, her eyes, her blush, as clear as they were that first day. Her scent filled me, but the burn still didn't come. Had I overcome my thirst for her perfect blood? If I'd tamed the beast within me. The pop of the man's shoulder in Toronto obscured her voice as she said my name. A pile of furry bodies marked my true nature. No, the beast inside me was alive and well, and after all this time, it would be dying to feast on her perfection. But I'd made it a year. My heart, the lifeless lump of stone that resided in Bella's soft, delicate hands, called to me with her voice. This is completely unnecessary. She smiled at me hopefully. You just have to turn around and come back. The struggle between my want and her safety, my immortal need and her fragile humanity, was flaying me alive. Was there no relief? You already know how I feel. Yes, I knew. My scream echoed through the swamp, sending birds and animals fleeing. You owe me an explanation, she said. Please, I begged. Can't you see how dangerous I am? I don't deserve you. Are you trying to be funny? Bella's ghostly image threw her hands on her hips. You know, the rest of us feel that way all the time. You're good at everything. Even my made-up Bella couldn't see herself clearly. I itched my eyes, unsure if I was willing her apparition away or trying to make it corporeal. What are you going to do? What I did so many times before. Run. Only this time I locked down my body and ran into my mind. I must have resembled a gargoyle, a frozen monster peering down at the world. It was the only way I could keep from going back to her. My hiding place was the past. That day, the curiosity, the animalistic ferocity of my craving. I'd wanted her more than I'd ever wanted anything. I still did. Every detail of that day passed before my unseeing eyes. I'd considered my hurried retreat cowardly at the time. Now I realized it was only a manifestation of the protective instinct I had for Bella. That had been my first response, to protect her, even if it was only from the venomous thoughts of the children around her. More memories. The delight in Tanya's eyes when I arrived at her home. The slow dulling of her happiness as I pulled away from her. The mistaken resolve to claim control of my life, when all along it had been Bella's. From that first moment, that first look into the depths of her silent soul, I was hers. Days passed, both inside and outside my thoughts. I was numbly aware of the world, but not a participant in it. The date, never important before, hung over me like a shroud. A week passed, and a new anniversary dawned, and the ache, the pull, became unbearable. Not her! The mental shout echoed through me, just like it had a year ago. My first reaction was to protect, again, but in the midst of crisis, fear, and relief, the heat of her body elicited another feeling. The moment was fleeting. I'd never examined it this closely. When I held her close, trapped under the twisted wreckage, the want became more than physical, and paradoxically, more physical. Protection became possession. I didn't understand it then, but I'd already fallen for her. Here, in the soggy jungle, I saw so clearly what had been obscured last January. Only Alice had seen the truth. "I don't know if you can leave anymore," she'd said, clinging to the dichotomy of Bella's future. But I'd changed the future, and was still changing it. Bella had lived. She would live. When the sun rose again, I blinked the dust out of my eyes. After a week spent as a statue, catatonic would be the human term, I finally woke. I hadn't been able to leave then, but I'd overcome that hurdle, barely. Every day was an anniversary now. Today marked the beginning of how I'd tried to coexist with Bella, live next to her, but apart from her. Had I really thought that difficult? What I wouldn't give to endure that hell again. Her only words that day echoed through my head. "Hello, Edward." Her voice was pleasant, gracious. I hadn't even the manners to look at her. Of course, I couldn't allow myself to even breathe around her back then. A low growl made my head turn. I'd been frozen so long that the jungle had tightened its bubble around me. Less than 100 yards away, a tapir limped toward the river, injured. It didn't sense the jaguar until it landed on the tapir's broad back. As the cat pierced the tapir's skull with its long fangs and crushing bite, I couldn't help but admire his strength and grace. "What's your favorite?" 3 simple words that brought reality crashing down around me. I was a hunter, just like the cat. I should be hunting him. No, not him. Her. For the first time in over a week, Victoria invaded my thoughts, and I turned away from the cat, tearing its prey apart. Yes, I was a hunter. Time to act like one. Another year. Not the future, but the past. Every day started the same. The sun rose, and Bella whispered those 2 words to me before throwing the memories of the previous February at me. I tried to shake her away, but she persisted, waiting for me in the remembered purgatory of high school. Her hands always appeared so pale and fragile against the black counters of the biology lab. Biology. The irony of the 2 of us meeting in that class used to amuse me. Prey and predator sharing a table, fighting the biology of their species, while studying the chemistry of life. Chemistry, yes, but she was what I'd studied. Life was what she gave me. I prayed I could return the favor a little longer. Water dripped through the trees onto me as I sulked, watching her fingers repeat those simple experiments, savoring the radiant heat of her body so close to mine, wishing it could be so again. My amended promise to stay away for a year had gone by the wayside, as I fought to make it even a month longer. Today would be particularly brutal. I'd moved north of Buenos Aires, looking for small, remote villages that Victoria might be terrorizing, having found no trace of her in the sprawling metropolis. It also got me away from the people and their affectionate ways. Yes, things here were different. Today was February 14th, a day of no particular importance on the Argentinian calendar. The cultural differences only amplified the loss in this case. The population here may not celebrate the commercialized Valentine's Day, but the lack of personal space and easy displays of devotion make every day seem like a celebration of love. The tiny village I'd visited was more like a large family than a neighborhood, and the recollection of my family drove me into the hills. The terrain here was much more rugged, more like the stereotypical rainforests seen on the Discovery Channel. The sun didn't reach the ground, even at high noon, but I'd known the exact moment it crossed the horizon. Another year. I'd started losing the battle against her pull, this time last year. So many of the human boys had her on their mind on that day that had been irritating, as if any of them were worthy of her. Their juvenile fantasies came to a head in biology. I'd arrived early, unable to stomach the humans fawning over each other in the cafeteria, fawning over the girl, even if only in their fantasies. I feigned reading, not looking up when the tokens arrived. To raise funds for the prom, the student government had sponsored a candy sale. Jessica Stanley marched in with a box of heart-shaped suckers before class started and set them on Mr. Banner's desk. "If you have a seating chart, I'll pass these out for you," she said, batting her eyelashes at the teacher. If only you paid as much attention to your homework as your makeup, he thought. I covered my smirk with my hand as he passed her the list. "Here you go, Miss Stanley." He didn't look up, continuing his paperwork. Jessica turned up her nose and turned to the tables. She worked her way through the empty class, setting one or two lollipops at various stations, commenting to herself about who seemed to be pursuing whom. At Newton's seat, she took her time, hiding two of his gifts under the book on his desk, but leaving hers centered in front of his seat. "At least there's not one from Bella," she thought. I made a fist under my table before reminding myself that the girl didn't matter. Jessica saved my table for last. The 3 suckers left in her box were all for Bella. She peeked at the names on the cards. Tyler, still apologizing, no doubt. Who else would spend money on her? Her curiosity went unsatisfied. The other 2 sweets were anonymous. She had no idea that Tyler's guilt had been overshadowed by an unrealistic fantasy that Bella actually favored him on a more personal level. As she guessed at who purchased the other gifts, I hid my smile. I knew exactly who'd sent them. Eric had been too timid to sign his note, opting for the cold, "your friend" salutation rather than anything bolder. The 3rd card brought my teeth together with a snap. Mike Newton wasn't afraid to be bold. He was testing the waters with the girl, again. Admirer indeed. He was so far beneath Bella, I was surprised he could even carry on a conversation with her. Jessica glanced over at me, and her heartbeat sped. "Could Edward?" "No way. I'll ask Angela. Maybe she knows who bought these." Me? Why would she even consider that I would send the girl such a meaningless trifle? I hadn't spoken to Bella in weeks. Stopping at the instructor's table, Jessica pulled one last sucker out of her pocket. "Happy Valentine's Day, Mr. Banner," she said sweetly. "If I can butter the old guy up, maybe he'll cut me a break." He didn't look up from the test he was grading. "Thank you, Miss Stanley. The same to you." She set the sucker on the desk in front of him and then dashed out, grumbling about how ungrateful he was. Mr. Banner glanced up at me and, seeing my disinterest, pulled the candy toward him. Jessica hadn't bothered to write on the card, and he slipped a black pen out of his shirt pocket. "To Isabella from—" My nostrils flared at his thoughts. I had heard his fondness for Bella in his thoughts, but had attributed it to pride, the adoration a teacher has for a good student. But there was more to the feeling, and even he refused to acknowledge it. "Edward, would you bring me a triple beam balance from the closet, please?" he said suddenly. "Yes, sir," I said, obediently walking to the back of the room. Thinking himself unobserved, he slipped his unsigned token among the others on Bella's desk, then hurried back to his place. I wondered who Bella would think sent it. but what Bella thought would never be known to me. I delivered the unnecessary instrument to the front, and then settled in my seat as the bell rang. Bella was one of the first to arrive, turning as pink as the candy when she saw the pile of sweets on her table. Flames scorched my throat, and I looked away. "You'll live through this class," I promised her silently. She unzipped her backpack and pulled out her notebook. Before she could sweep the candies into the bag, Newton jumped onto the corner of the table. "Hey, Bella, did you get any Valentines?" His voice trailed off when he saw the pile. Yeah, I guess so." She threw them into the backpack and set it on the floor. "You're not even going to read them? Who else is after her?" Her cheeks turned from rosy to blazing red. I swallowed uncomfortably. She buried her nose in her notes. "Later, class is about to start." Attention always seemed to bother the girl, even if it was affection. "Nah, we have a few minutes." With absolutely no sense of propriety, Newton jumped down, reached into her bag, and put the gifts back on the table. "Wow, you have a lot." Sighing, Bella picked up the first one. I watched her reaction through the cat's eyes. "This one's from Tyler." The unspoken "of course" and eye roll told me she didn't find the gesture endearing. Mike actually chuckled. She continued, "This one is from an admirer." "How romantic," Mike said, in what he thought was a sexy voice. In less than a second, I could crush his windpipe, silencing that fake rasp forever. "I suppose," Bella said, ignoring him. I fought back a laugh at her dismissal of his gift. "This one says your friend." Her voice dropped to a whisper. "I wonder if that's Angela." Her response, as usual, was completely unexpected. Angela and Bella had struck up a friendship, and it was clear that Bella valued that relationship above most others. Mike didn't hear her comment, thankfully. He would have misconstrued it, of that I had no doubt. "Who's the last one from?" he asked, wishing he'd signed his name. She flipped the card open. "It's not signed. It's to Isabella." The little crease appeared between her eyebrows, the V that formed when she concentrated on something. Irrationally, I wanted to trace it with my finger. "Who do you think that one's from? No one calls you Isabella anymore." Then Mike glanced at me. "But it sounds like something Cullen would say." Mike looked at her again, and much to my surprise, her eyes darted in my direction. Did she suspect me of such a cowardly advance? Why did I want to smile at that fact? She dismissed me with a minute shake of her head and tossed the candy back into the bag. "Class is starting. You'd better sit down," she said to the vile boy. Mr. Banner smiled sweetly in her direction, noting the blush still lingering on Bella's cheeks. Just as Mrs. Cope said to herself when I was around, he reminded himself that Bella was less than half his age. Half his age. She was closer to being his age than I would ever be. But on that day, a year ago, jealousy and love had started to war in my heart. I should have stopped it then. As I drowned in the past, I alternately cursed myself for being too weak to walk away on the one hand, and for being too short-sighted to have wasted those days with her on the other. Those weeks had passed with my silence. I could have been learning even more about her, had I the courage to talk to her. I was such a fool. "You try very hard to make up for something that wasn't your fault." She was always so forgiving. I wasn't. I couldn't forgive myself for everything I'd put Bella through. I couldn't forgive Victoria either. Admitting defeat, I reached into my pocket. Victoria could hide from me forever, but there was one person she couldn't hide from. I dialed slowly, somewhat surprised that the phone didn't ring as I did. "Hi," Alice answered. I waited for an accusation or jibe, but none came. "Hi, Alice. You know I'm calling." "Yes, you're not doing well, Edward," she said sadly. "I miss you." The anger and condemnation were absent from her tone. It'd been so long since I'd heard affection permeate her words that I couldn't help but return it. "I miss you too, sis." "I can't talk you into coming home, just for a little while, can I?" I wondered if she knew that the defeat in her voice was more convincing than her anger. I didn't bother to answer her question. She undoubtedly saw my course. "I need your help." "I know." She clicked her nails against something hard. "You're not going to like this. I don't see you catching Victoria, Edward. I see you in Bella's bedroom. Every day you're gone, the vision gets clearer. No snide comeback formed on my lips because I knew she was right. But I wasn't ready to give up. The longer I stayed away, the safer Bella would be. She wouldn't want me back anyway, after what I'd done to her. Edward? Alice asked, her concern snapping me back to reality. What about Victoria? I pictured my sister's face and the blank stare that she'd be wearing as she searched the future for me. She's hard to see, Alice said, her frustration obvious. I don't think she plans much. She seems to be rather impulsive. Wait, she's hunting. She gasped. It's hazy, but she's in a city near the water. The ocean, I think. It's warm. Her victim was wearing light clothing. Victoria killed a girl. Her voice trailed off. Is there nothing else? A coastal city could be anywhere. They're surrounded by colors, beads, and feathers? There's music, but the woman's screams are too loud. I'm sorry. No, it's fine. Alice had described a celebration of some kind. Can you tell me when this will happen? It's quite a ways off. 10 days, maybe 2 weeks? I could check again later and call you. Her intention to help seemed sincere. No, you've given me enough. I think I know where she's headed. Due east. Thank you. Rio? Yes, it could have been Carnival. Where are you now? I pulled the phone back and looked at it in shock. No, I was really talking to Alice. You don't know? You asked me not to watch you, and I've tried, Edward. I really have. I can't always ignore you, though, especially when you're hurting so much. I still think... She stopped abruptly, and I heard rustling. What I think doesn't matter anymore. I truly want you to be happy, Edward. We all do. My throat tightened. Thank you, Alice. She shifted again, and I heard the murmur of conversation in the background. I'm in northeast Argentina, I think. Alice hadn't been watching me. What had she been doing? Bella asked the question for me. So, did Alice see me coming? Huh. And no, I haven't been watching her either, though I've been tempted more than once to look. What have you been up to? I tried to put some real interest into the question. I'm in Mississippi. She didn't need to tell me why, and Bella didn't comment either, thankfully. Have you found anything? Some. I'll tell you when you come back, she giggled, not unkindly. I borrowed your Mustang. Nice ride. It's yours. Thanks, but it's a little heavy in the corners for me. Maybe Jazz'll like it. A book closed. Speaking of which, he's going to call in 7 minutes. Not together on Valentine's? I wasn't surprised. Candy and flowers weren't really Jasper's style. He had a test today. We'll celebrate when I get home. She paused, and I wondered if she was looking forward again. You'll need fresh clothes when you get to Sao Paulo. Don't pass up the next Jaguar you encounter. I'd wish you luck, but, well, you don't see it helping. I understand. Thanks again, Alice. Take care. I rose as I spoke, getting my bearings so I could start the search again, before I curled back into a ball and buried myself in memories. Goodbye, she said, the sadness returning. I flipped the phone shut and tried to muster some enthusiasm for the coming run. Run the whole way? Bella said, her lips trembling. When her imagined lips neared mine, my knees buckled. When her fingers locked behind my neck, I backed into a tree, toppling it to the ground. You'll be the death of me, I'd whispered. I didn't know at the time how true those words were. There was no life for me without her. My failure was complete. Victoria wasn't in Rio. I was beginning to think she'd never set foot on the continent. My phantom Bella was becoming more and more demanding. You could have saved yourself all this regret. Fighting her siren's call every step of the way, it'd taken me nearly 2 weeks to cover the 500 miles to Rio de Janeiro. Carnival had already started when I arrived, turning the city's schedule on its head. The humans hibernated on the beach during the scorching daylight hours, sleeping and baking. It was after the sun had set that the reveling got into full swing. With temperatures approaching 80 degrees at midnight, there was no need for the people to change out of their string bikinis and t-shirts. Even with so much available prey to choose from, Victoria should have been easy to find. Desperate for some tangent to take me away from my mental tour of the past, I surveyed parade routes, inspected floats, chased down nearly every feather in the city. But Carnival came and went with nary a hint of Victoria, and the memories of my growing infatuation with Bella strengthened. In a last-ditch attempt at locating the nomad, I scouted police headquarters. It didn't take long to discover the truth. According to the local authorities, this had been one of the most violence-free Carnival celebrations in recent memory. They joked that Lent must have come early. What they didn't know was that the lone vampire in attendance had given up humans decades ago, Lent aside. I would be sacrificing this year, I thought. Though Ash Wednesday would have been a fitting anniversary for me, it was the following day that marked the beginning of the end. A year ago, I'd succumbed, unable to ignore Bella any longer. How I wanted to do the same now. When night fell, I walked through the city, keenly aware of where the airport was, and exactly how long it'd take me to get there on foot. "What? Are you speaking to me again?" she asked angrily, closing her eyes. She'd said the same words a year ago. Charlie chimed in. "I thought maybe that Mike Newton. I wanted to say he was the reason I'd broken my silence with Bella last year, but it was really my weakness." Bella's arms opened to me, beckoning. Her imaginary heat swirled around me. "I've never felt like this about anyone before, not even close." I ducked down an alley, as if I could hide from her. A year, a month, a week. I wasn't sure I could make it a day. "Edward, please." My finger burned, remembering when I'd touched her lips. "You're ready now, then?" I said, wishing she'd deny me. "A girl can dream." In the days that followed, I was only able to force myself to search for an hour or two, checking out the now decaying decorations one last time. Bella filled the rest of my hours, getting closer and closer as I remembered those days and nights. I'd started watching her sleep a year ago, sitting in her room, breathing her scent, listening to her mumbled dreams. "Come back," she said, showing me how she tossed and turned after her trip to First Beach. That defining trip where she learned what I really was. "Come back." Next came the anniversary of the awful night in Port Angeles. Human predators had cornered her, and I barely made it to her in time. And yet, with all her fear, her frailness, what were the first words out of her mouth? "Are you okay?" So selfless, so trusting. Bella looked at me from the passenger seat of my car, her hair windblown, her hands healing, and she smiled. I made my way away from the beach, heading into the poorest parts of the city to hide. With no leads, I had nowhere else to go. My thirst loomed large, but I had no desire to hunt. I should have separated myself from the humans, but I knew if I ran into the wildlands again, I wouldn't stop. Not until I reached the cold, wet forests of Forks. The anniversaries continued, getting more personal, more sensual. No one questioned me as I climbed the stairs of the decrepit tenement, nor did they take notice when I jumped into the attic. I huddled in the attic, waiting for the latest memory to hit, the one that had me hugging my legs to prevent me from giving in. March 12th, the meadow. I'd come so close that day to ending her life. Or had I? She knelt in front of me, her face glowing in the sun. With a deep breath, she leaned in close, her lips parting, her throat inches from my teeth. Her heart sped up, calling to me. The skin on her neck pulsed, exuding an aroma more enticing than anything else on earth. So close. She wouldn't have time to feel any pain. But I didn't imagine biting her, not at first. To feel her flesh against my lips, taste her skin with my tongue. That's what I wanted. The bite would follow, of that I had no doubt, but it was carnal desire that gave me that tenth of a second's hesitation, that fraction of time to separate myself. Now, as I huddled in the dust and grime, ignoring the babble of 100 minds, I wondered if I would have killed her. Only moments later, I had my head on her chest, her heart beating so loudly that it echoed in my head. She was so warm, so soft, and so beautiful. Of course I would have killed her. That's what I am. a bloodthirsty killing machine. I ached to feel her head on my chest again, to feel her hair against my cheek. Would she leap at me the way she had that next morning, jumping into my arms and pressing her lips to mine? The thought seemed to erase all my pain, close the chasm in my chest. "You left!" she scolded, running a fiery finger over my collar. "Does it matter?" I asked timidly. "Not really." She held perfectly still, waiting for me to kiss her. To be healed, to have her. It was more than I could stand. It wouldn't be long now. Just one more day. Could I deprive her of danger for one more day? Another hour? I wrapped my arms around my legs, wishing to become the statue again. "Will I see you tomorrow?" she asked, the smell of her tears overwhelming me. My forehead crashed against my knees. I couldn't say no.